Hello, everybody, and welcome to Planet's FPL, the world where everything revolves around Fantasy Premier League. My name is Suj.
And my name is James.
James, it's Thursday. Pow wow wow.
It's Throwback Thursday. Do you think we should start considering having a different "the world revolves around"
Coronavirus. That's a bit morbid, isn't it?
A little bit. I don't know. Welcome to Planet FPL, where the world doesn't stop. Maybe I don't know.
Yeah, the world doesn't stop because of no football. I'll think of one, James. If anybody's got a good one, this is audience participation on Twitter at Suj and Shah, at Planet FPL Pod. Tweet us, and I'll practice a few, and then we'll decide which one it's going to be. If you've got a new intro for us for the duration of no football, then do tune in. And if you're in Holland, it's going to be a while before you get any football.
Oh yeah. That's a next week conversation, I think.
Another good stream last night. How many points did you get in Champman FPL, James, before we get onto our real topic for today?
60. I'm up to about 75th overall. I had a good jump last night, yeah.
I ended up with 9 players, and I got about 43, I think, 44, something like that. Could have been worse. At least I had Shearer as captain. I was going to wildcard yesterday, and you did tell me, have a look at Whitebeard's page and stuff. Very, very good. But the problem, what happened was I started looking at my wildcard at about 4:30, 4:45, give or take. And then I ended up going down the rabbit hole of A or B. And here, like normal FPL, I know that my short list of players that I'm going to look at. I didn't here, and I ended up with it at about 5 or 6 50-50 calls. And I thought, you know what, sod it. I'm just not going to waste my wild card trying to rush it. I'm going to give myself time before Saturday to actually drill down and play it properly. I don't know what the average was. Do you know what the average was?
Roundabouts where you were, I think.
That's fine. And if I hit the average and I've saved my wild card to make a better choice next week, I'll take it. It's all good. Good.
Those tuning in for the main event today will note the fact that you mentioned Shearer captain. He was my captain last night as well, and obviously part of this story that we're going to talk about.
Yeah, indeed. Indeed it is. It's been, do you know what, before we get into Throwback Thursday, I'm working from home today, James. First time since lockdown that I've managed to get a whole day at home. I have an increased respect for anybody that's homeschooling and working from home. Yeah, tell me about it. I thought, you know what, it's all right, just get the kids to do what they got to do. I've got 2, right? So we divide and conquer with the missus. I've learned that my 6-year-old is 100% going to be a Premier League footballer, mate.
Not if he does kick-ups the way his father does.
Nah, that's true. But he has the temperament to be a Premier League footballer.
At 6.
He is a fucking prima donna. That if ever I've seen one. Fucking throwing tantrums, make him do a little bit of work, and it's like, this is not fair. Yeah, he is a 13-year-old girl trapped in a 6-year-old boy's body. The prima donna galore, mate. And there are a few in the Newcastle squad from the old years that could have been classified as that.
Yeah, I'll apologise on behalf of all the teenage girls out there. You didn't mean it really, did you, Suj?
I was cussing my son out, mate. There we go. So, it's been an eventful day. I'm really looking forward to chatting about Newcastle. Tell everybody about our Throwback Thursday, man.
We are talking about Newcastle United, predominantly the years of 1992 to 1997, which essentially is what we'll call the Keegan years, the period of the entertainers, as they were, as they thrilled neutral fans and obviously fans of the football club up and down the country, as they so nearly won the Premier League, but epically failed in the sort of way that only a club like Newcastle United can. As a Spurs fan, I understand the correlations with Newcastle in terms of the being close and all that. And this was Newcastle's period of being close. That said, as good as they were for the 5 years, the one thing that stood out to me looking back on it was the only thing that they actually came close to winning was that Premier League in 95, 96. Never got beyond a quarter-final in a cup competition. And actually, when you look back specifically on that season, it might have actually been a couple of cup defeats that actually led to the they're obviously the losing of form because it's such an incredible season. But that's not really where the story begins as such.
Do you think Newcastle's reputation over the years of style over substance is warranted? And do you think that this era perhaps was the start of that, where they've always potentially picked up one or two big name signings or gone for flair players to grab the attention of the headlines rather than perhaps a bit more pragmatic approach to building a squad?
Maybe, but I would say that this century, Newcastle have been no more entertaining than many other clubs who have performed similarly. It's that team from the mid-90s is what that correlates to what we think of Newcastle United historically, etc. The fact that suddenly they came from the second division side that was virtually basically on the abyss financially and about to head into Division 3, essentially what Sunderland have done now. And they built it up to within a couple of years have got from a stadium that was falling apart to one of the best stadiums in the country, one of the best teams in the country, one of the best supported clubs in the country. And that's the fairy tale story that we remember of Newcastle. That the people that lived in that period and remember the 90s can remember that it was only a couple of years earlier that they were doing nothing. Really, really on the verge of complete crisis until basically Sir John Hall got his hands on the club and then appointed Kevin Keegan as manager.
So where should we start? Should we start at Division 2? Well,
Keegan took over in February 1992. They'd sacked Ozzy Ardiles, who still managed to get a Spurs job after this. They'd completely failed and fallen apart. They were conceding goals left, right and centre. This is before the Keegan time. They had some good attacking players in Newcastle. They couldn't keep it out at the other end. Keegan went in there in February and instantly had a response. But what I didn't remember till looking back into the data from the 91-92 second division season was that going into the final day of the season, they could have still gone down. It actually wasn't like, he's miraculously got them out of it. They got out of it and then got sucked back into it again and had to win their last two games. Admittedly, had they won at Leicester, in a remarkable game that you should really go and track down on YouTube just to see the scenes behind the home end at Leicester. Because basically Leicester are in the playoffs. Newcastle go 1-0 up at Filbert Street. A few of their fans get on the pitch. Newcastle equalise through Steve Walsh in the 89th minute. All the Leicester fans run on the pitch. And then obviously it takes the game ages to restart. And a lot of the Leicester supporters don't go back to the stands. They stand on the edge of the pitch. Yeah, it's that. This is only, 1992. They still stand on the edge of the pitch and the ball goes forward and Steve Walsh scores an own goal. And Newcastle score again. And then for some reason, the Leicester fans just run on the pitch again because they're already there. There's a YouTube clip I saw where Keegan, in the moment, is very protective of his players. I think speaks a lot in terms of what he was, the human nature of him, which was, we'll talk about a little later, was obviously part of his downfall as well. But he got a group of players performing very well. He credits his best signing while he was at Newcastle in buying his first signing, which was Kevin Keegan from Coventry City, who was nicknamed Killer. He actually only played, I think, 29 times for Newcastle. But he was the steady ship and the authoritative leader that they needed defensively to make sure those that could score goals up front was going to be enough and then keep some out of the bag. So they stayed up essentially by the skin of their teeth. And then the next year, pissed the league.
Yep.
Properly pissed it.
This was Keegan's first managerial job. So it's rare for managers to come in and have that level of success straight off the bat. Or I suppose there's an even bigger romance to it, right? Being a former player, Geordie boy, and first managerial job to come into it and come into Newcastle. So looking at it now, it's not often that ex-players will come into their first job and achieve what he did in his 5 years.
You used to see a lot of it. I kind of referenced it already, the fact that Ardiles got the Tottenham job afterwards. It was very common in those years that if a club was doing badly, the one thing to get fans back on side was appoint a former glorious player, for example.
I mean, it happened with Shearer at Newcastle as well.
Yes, later on. That circumstance was very different because I think Shearer put himself forward to say this football club needs saving. And he quite openly wasn't even speaking to Ashley when he took over for those final 8 games at Newcastle and ultimately, unfortunately, failed. The rumour when Keegan was appointed was that since leaving Newcastle in 86, I think, or 85 might have been, he'd had no involvement in any football for just under 7 years and had apparently only watched 2 live games of football. He wasn't even watching football to see how football might have developed from a period when in 85, English clubs, remember, got banned from European competition all the way up to 92, and now we're on the verge of the Premier League era. Football's changed. We've had Italian 90 in the middle and everything. Apparently, he didn't watch none of it. Weird. So there was a lot of, is this guy even the right person? Whatever. What he had, I think, a great sense to get into his players to believe in themselves and feel part of a group, part of a team, and they were allowed to go and express themselves and enjoy themselves. And once he's got over that first hurdle of keeping them up and making sure they didn't go into Division 3, and obviously then with the backing of Sir John Hall, which was incredibly important, they stormed the league the next year. And then when they got promoted, he was ruthless about it. So, like, he brought in Andy Cole in February when they were already pissing the second division. And David Kelly had been brilliant for Newcastle up front for a few years. Straight away, they're up into Premier League. See you later, mate. You're off.
Yep.
And in that first season up, they were kind of thought of a little bit like when Wolves came up. They were the ones I really remember as a kid that everybody was like, this team's going to be really good, you know. They're going to finish top half and that. Not only did they finish top half, they finished third. They finished the season as the highest goal scorers in the Premier League. They scored more than champions Manchester United in 93, 94. Andy Cole scored 34 league goals, 41 in all competitions, also won Young Player of the Year. And
that's a hell of a number of goals.
Well, yeah, which obviously led to...
You rarely see that nowadays. And even though sometimes people have more games, I mean, 41 goals in all competitions is incredible.
Yes. And
no
European competition as well.
No, that's true. I suppose rotation was a bit less than it is now. You see way more rotation than you ever used to. But Goal King Cole was just, he's a class act.
Top striker and obviously went on to do very good things at Manchester United, which kind of brings you into what happened in 94, 95. So basically, they didn't start the season as well as they'd done the previous year, and ended up finishing 6th. But points-wise, weren't particularly any worse off than when they'd finished 3rd the previous year. It was just that Nottingham Forest, who came up, did really well, and Liverpool and Leeds had also both really improved. And obviously, the title was between Blackburn and Manchester United, which Blackburn won on the last day. But obviously, Keegan sold famously Andy Cole to United in January.
Yeah.
And he didn't buy a replacement. He didn't do anything. There's that famous scene, which is another one you can go and grab on YouTube, where he actually stands on the steps at St James's Park and asks the supporters to trust him, to believe in what he's trying to do for the football club. So they go into like the rest of the season with just like Paul Kitson, Peter Beardsley. I think Kitson might even although he scored in the next game, which was a draw against Manchester United. I think he picked up an injury. And Newcastle kind of staggered through the rest of the season. And at which point you're waiting for, right, so they all love him, right? So when someone like Keegan speaks, everybody believes into what he says. It would have been the same with us with Pochettino.
Yeah.
Pochettino said something, we'd all be like, yeah, go on, Poch, I'll trust you, go with it, whether I agree or don't agree. So although the fans hated it, they weren't in a position to challenge for the title in early 95 anyway, so they trusted him. And then that summer they went mad. They bought Shaka Hislop from Reading would eventually take over as number 1 from Pavel Cernacek. They bought Warren Barton for Wimbledon. At the time, it was the most expensive defender bought in British football.
Nice hair.
Well, talking of nice hair, they also bought the great David Ginola to properly turn them into the absolute entertainers at this point. And smashed 6 million, which was a lot of money at the time, on Les Ferdinand to be that Andy Cole replacement. And they start the season like a train, mate. Suddenly you're looking at me going, bloody hell, this Ferdinand, Beardsley, Ginola, Rob Lee. Yeah. They'd also obviously, the previous summer, they'd brought in Philippe Albert following USA 94. and he wasn't much of a centre half really, because he was always carrying the ball out. He would have been great in the sweeper system, but Newcastle didn't play a sweeper system. Played back four.
No.
Warren Barton and Beresford as fullbacks really were two defenders who wanted to push on constantly. So quite often you get sort of that Darren Peacock, who they would also buy for quite an expensive 2.7 million. It was often left at the back on his own. It was I think he once described playing for Newcastle at the back as being like the only man on a burning bridge with no way off. Essentially just stuck, like looking around for help. But they would so regularly outscore teams, didn't they? I mean, the one thing to look back on, I should have written down the notes, how many goals they scored, but I do know looking back on their season, I don't know if you want to pull it up while I'm talking, Suj, is how many goals did Newcastle score in the 95-96 league season? Because it's not as many as what people remember. Obviously, people remember some of the mad games that happened during that season, but from sort of January onwards, they had a real dip-off in terms of the amount of goals scored. Like earlier in the season, they'd beaten like Wimbledon 6-1, for example. But there was lots of victories with 2s and 3s. Other than that, they weren't actually blitzing sides. I think they only scored 70 goals or something.
less, James. In 93-94, they scored 82 goals, which was loads. A couple more than Manchester United, who scored 80 goals.
You have to remember that's 42 season. League season up until this 95-96. Yeah.
Then everybody around them, Blackburn was 63, Arsenal 53, Leeds was 65. So these two were both in the 80s at that point. 95-96, they scored 66 goals. United were at 73 and Liverpool were at 70. So they weren't in the top two there. They were a lot less. Their goal difference was considerably less, plus 29 compared to plus 38, plus 36. I mean, they sat in the middle of Liverpool and Manchester United.
Well, United had things like the 9-0 against Ipswich. Actually, that was the year before, 94-95. But they beat Nottingham Forest 5-0 towards the end of that season. They had a few other big wins. 4-0 at Coventry, I remember. They had some big wins during that season, whereas Newcastle actually didn't so much. They didn't score as many as what people remember. But they absolutely blitzed the start of that league campaign. They came to Spurs, which I think was game 11. And at that point, they'd won 9 out of 10. The only defeat being at Southampton in September. They'd won every other game. Drew at Spurs. Ginola scored a terrific goal. I think people remember, obviously, the home kit was quite iconic, the black and white stripes, but it was this sort of blue and purpley pink horizontal striped kit, which became quite iconic because of that team as well. And then they continued to have great results. They lost at Chelsea in early December, then had back-to-back wins against Everton and Nottingham Forest. And then crucially in December, they lost 2-0 to Manchester United, but it wasn't like catastrophic. They recovered to beat Arsenal in the league. They'd also won at Coventry in the league. So at this point, they've actually, I think United had a game in hand, but they were 12 points clear. Yeah. And by the middle of March, this is what people forget. People think, Newcastle were 12 points clear in January. People think, United got them at the end. United had got them by mid-March. And then they were kind of neck and neck for a while. But United were just edging it. I'll come on to Manchester United's results in a little bit. What I noticed looking back on it was basically the period where they started to decline a little bit, sort of January, February. They lost the League Cup quarter-final at Arsenal, and they also lost an FA Cup replay to Chelsea on penalties at St James's Park. And I don't know if losing those two cup defeats were in the space of just over a week. I don't know if that had an impact where suddenly they'd been romping away with the league and obviously ended up with two very difficult cup draws here, but lost them both. I don't know if there was any psychological effect on that. You wouldn't think so, because though following that defeat to Chelsea, I remember Peter Beardsley scored 2 late goals, one a brilliant winning goal to beat Bolton. Then they beat Sheffield Wednesday, and then they won at Middlesbrough. And then things started to go wrong when they lost 2-0 at Upton Park. Suj, I don't know if you've got any memories of this. I'm going to say no.
No. I was 15 years old, mate. I was probably doing things I shouldn't have been.
Then, unlike in other times, the results didn't recover immediately. So there was a mad 3-3 draw at Manchester City where Philippe Albert scored 2 of Newcastle's goals, one an equaliser with about 10 minutes to go. And then came the famous game with United at St James's Park on the Monday night football in early March, where, make no mistakes about it, if that game re-happened exactly the same 10 times over, Newcastle would be about 3-0 up at half-time. Schmeichel saved everything.
Yeah.
And when it mattered, obviously Cantona scored the key goal for United. And I think there were about 6 or 7 games that United won 1-0, which ended with another one in the FA Cup final against Liverpool, where they won 1-0 and Cantona scored the only goal. They weren't at their peak, United, but Manchester United were relentless in what they were doing. I think following a draw with Aston Villa in January, they won every domestic game, includes obviously they're winning the double, the FA Cup as well, bar the one mad defeat at Southampton, which was obviously when they turned up in the grey kit.
Oh, yeah, and then changed at
half time.
Yeah, it couldn't see each other, apparently.
Sorry, the only other one that they didn't win was a late draw at QPR, and another late goal from Cantona actually got them a draw at QPR. And this was the immediate game after the win at St James's Park. Meanwhile, Newcastle recover and play West Ham again quite quickly and beat them 3-0 at St James's. Mm-hmm. So at that point, you're thinking, okay, this will be all right. Then they've got 2 massive away games. They lose 2-0 at Arsenal. Okay, can happen. And then obviously the infamous game at Liverpool, which is still for me the best Premier League game I've ever watched. It had everything. Looking back on it now, 25 years later or so, the quality is not as good as what we would expect now. But the drama and the intensity of that football match, and obviously the atmosphere being at Anfield, etc., I don't think would as it certainly hasn't been beaten for me in a Premier League game.
Do you know, the interesting thing with that game is when you talk about teams that concede a lot of goals, they'll always, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but people will talk about, I'd rather win 4-3 than win 1-0. And it's always 4-3 is the scoreline that people use when they're talking about outscoring the opposition. I'd rather win 4-3 than win 1-0. And I think it's because of that game that the scoreline 4-3 is the one that people gravitate to when they talk about outscoring the opposition and who gives a shit what we're doing at the back.
You get more 4-3s than 5-4s, don't you? 5-4's pushing it, isn't it?
Yeah, true.
Maybe that's the reason why. Newcastle had some great other 4-3s, both in the following season, actually. Beat Aston Villa 4-3 and Leicester 4-3. So this wasn't the only 4-3 that Newcastle were involved in. That game epitomised Newcastle United, because it very easily could have won the game. Very easy could have won the game. You know, they go a goal down early to Robbie Fowler. And then the other thing that I thought of thinking back to it the other day was actually how the start of the game was a little bit similar to Tottenham at City in the Champions League, in the sense that they conceded so early. And then within 10 minutes, they're winning. Ferdinand's equalised. Ginola runs through and scores a great goal. Unlike Spurs, Newcastle hold on roughly to about the hour mark. Fowler scores, and then Liverpool all over them. And then Rob Lee plays this beautiful little slide ball through to Faustino Asprilla. Liverpool's defensive line is shocking. You wouldn't get a top-side defending like that now. And Asprilla scores this very iconic outside the boot goal to put it round David James, who tries to save it with a diving header. But they can't hang on, can they? Collymore scores twice, the final one in the final minute. And there's the famous image of Keegan in front of the hoarding on the bench, isn't there? And in that moment, you knew they'd fucked it. It was finished then.
How much do you think the momentum impact of the cups actually had an impact? Because we've seen something like, I don't know if we can say it's similar, but look at Liverpool this season, right? The FA Cup and the Champions League, and in amongst that, they lost league form. That had they not lost to had they beaten Watford and maybe picked up one other point, there would be no debate. They'd be champions right now, right? And we'd be giving them the trophy and no one would begrudge it. But I think people are like, yeah, forget about it. They didn't give a toss about the FA Cup. They will have wanted to go through in the Champions League indefinitely. Well, they definitely would have. But in amongst that, it doesn't surprise me that there was a little bit of form loss in the league. I don't
know. I've never heard it spoken of, and I'm sure someone has somewhere. I've never heard it spoken of. If those 2 cup defeats to Arsenal and Chelsea in January had any effect on the morale. I think one of the things you might take out of it was Arsenal at this point were becoming a very good side with sort of Bergkamp, Ian Wright. This is just about to come in sort of Wenger period. It's just before. But obviously, one of the better sides, I think Arsenal finished fifth, maybe. When they came up against big sides in that second half of the season, Newcastle, they got beat. They lost the big games to Liverpool, to Newcastle, to Blackburn Rovers, who had a bad season, but were obviously still champions of England. They lost to Arsenal. They lost to Chelsea on penalties. They lost the big games in the second half of that season. And obviously the one I just mentioned there, Blackburn, was after Liverpool. They beat Queen's Park Rangers, a very poor Queen's Park Rangers, narrowly. And then lost at Blackburn. They were in front, and Graham Fenton scores, I think it was Graham Fenton, scored 2 late goals. And they've lost again. They've lost the lead again away from home and blown it. By which point United are comfortable, really.
They were joint for the least draws that season. And it's a bit of a funny stat because they drew 6 games. Manchester United drew 7. But you feel like everybody else in the middle of the table was drawing 11 or 12 or 13 games a season. It was all or nothing, wasn't it? They're going to win or they're going to lose.
This team didn't play football matches to draw. They weren't someone who were going to sit, at 3-3 at Anfield. They probably, because remember, Liverpool were pushing hard to try and get in the mix as well. Liverpool had a good second half to the season. I remember thinking that night that Liverpool could yet win it because they were the form horse, even though they were behind United and Newcastle. And it was about, 7 or 8 games still to go or so. But yeah, I mean, the thing to do in hindsight would have been, if they'd have taken the draw that night and won every game left, they would have still won the league.
Yeah.
There was no thoughts of that. They were still trying to win it. No. At some point, now I think a team would take their lot and go, Joe, this has been a bit mental. Let's play on the counter. You can't play on a counter attack. You just attacked. Football was obviously very different in that sense then as well, in terms of defences being deeper, less higher lines, although Liverpool got exposed for that on Asprilla's goal that night. But yeah, actually, in spite of, say, those defeats at Arsenal and at Liverpool in March and then in April, if they'd have held their nerve and won the remaining games, they would have still had enough and won it. They ended up losing the league by 4 points, which obviously includes drawing the last 2. So if they'd have won at Nottingham Forest on the Thursday before the final game of the season, then Tottenham on the Sunday, with both games finished 1-1, it would have been level on goal difference. So if they'd have won those last 2 and drawn 3-3 at Liverpool, it still could have afforded the fifth defeat at Blackburn. So that's why that period in sort of between January to early April is why people look back at it as like a catastrophe in terms of how they dropped. And the reason United caught them so quickly was they were just relentlessly winning every week. The Southampton defeat that United had was after Newcastle lost at Blackburn. But by that point, the damage was done.
You obviously they went on to finish the following season second as well, but not quite with the same drama.
Well, no, because there was a lot that happened in the meantime. Newcastle had a good finish to the 96-97 season, be it from January onwards. I think they only lost 2 league games. Keegan obviously went in January of that season. So having lost the league to Manchester United and finished second, and obviously infamously Keegan blew his top after the Leeds United game with the most famous football interview ever, I think. Do I not like that? You've still got to go to Middlesbrough and get a result. And he didn't hold back, did he? When you say things about that, like a professional, like Stuart Pearce. Yeah. I mean, if you've never seen that interview, you've been living under a rock. So I'm not going to talk about it in too much detail. But then, yeah, he was pissed off. So when they smashed the British transfer record, paid 50 million on Alan Shearer because having Asprilla, Ferdinand, Ginola, Rob Lee,
Beardsley still there?
It just wasn't enough. So yeah, let's get Shearer to play with Ferdinand as well. I mean, my goodness. But yeah, they started the season well again, but then from the start of November up to the end of December, they didn't win a game.
No.
And then they were well behind. And the game that they first won was a game that I watched at Tottenham. It wasn't at Tottenham. The game was at Newcastle. They used to put the 3 o'clock games occasionally, if they were big enough, on the big jumbotrons above the goal at the other end. I mean, you sat miles away, but it was better than not watching the game at all, right?
True.
So you used to go in the ground, pay like, I don't know, 3-4 quid or something, and watch it there. And little did I know that, I mean, me and Dad walked out the ground at 4-0 with half hour to go. 4-0 down and could have been about 8-0 down. They massacred us. They went on to win 7-1. Little did I know that Keegan had decided on that same day that was it for him at Newcastle as well. He decided that the haunting face of Jerry Francis when he went to shake his hand at the end of the game made him decide that football just wasn't worth it. That's the supposed rumour. They beat Newcastle on, I think, New Year's Day 3-0, and then before an FA Cup third round match at Charlton, basically straight after the Leeds game, I think the next day or so, he resigned.
Yeah, let's talk about him then. Let's talk about him. You talk about him wearing his heart on his sleeve and being overly emotional. I mean, that I'd love it if we catch him and that kind of thing. There's a few outbursts, but he had a few others as well. I remember I was looking back at an interview where he was brutally honest in terms of, we don't have the money, we don't have the players, we can't break the top 4. He was very outspoken about the situation of football, the Premier League, the money in the game, how hard it was to break that monopoly and stuff throughout his time in the Premier League.
Yeah, I mean, he did say afterwards as well that he thought he'd taken the team as far as he could, which maybe that's the truth. I don't know. It's, at that point, looking at that team, you think he's added Shearer to it, and he's still looking at it going, I can't get near Manchester United. And had he stayed another year, with obviously Wenger now in at Arsenal and stuff like that, would Newcastle have been closer if he'd stayed? Well, 100% they would have, because fast forward 18 months, they're in a relegation battle under Kenny Dalglish, with Shearer having serious injury, Ferdinand, Ginola sold. Obviously, it went from the entertainers to Dalglish wanting to get Newcastle to be a more pragmatic team to get them as the winners, but it was just a bad fit, wrong person, wrong time, basically. So yes, Newcastle certainly would have been better off if Keegan had stayed. Would they have won the league? I suspect probably not, with the way that Arsenal would then improve. Because what happened with Arsenal was it kicked Manchester United into another gear as well, where I think United always thought they could keep Newcastle at bay a little bit, whereas Arsenal become a really seriously powerful threat. Which Newcastle, other than the 95-96 season, weren't. But they did finish that 96-97 season quite well under Dalglish. But then the problem was he sold like Ferdinand and Shearer, and then Ginola broke his leg. So they'd gone from having all them attackers to no attackers, basically.
Yeah.
And that hence why they struggled so much in 96-97, and Manchester United won that title campaign very, very comfortably. They could afford bad results going in towards the end. Actually, probably made them a little bit lethargic going into 97-98, actually. Keegan, as you said, was very heart on his sleeve in terms of he was reactive, wasn't he? He so famously apparently resigned for England in the toilets of the England dressing room during the final game at Wembley when Didi Hamann scored for Germany in a World Cup qualifier in 2000, must have been that. Yeah. He said when he left Newcastle that he'd never do management again, but rocked up at Fulham 9 months later as technical director originally, but like, we don't know where this is going to lead, right? And obviously, within 6 months, he's managing the team. He gets them promoted a year later. Then he obviously does the England job. He's like, I'm definitely finished with football. Then he rocks up at Manchester City. He gets them promoted straight away as well. Newcastle, Man City and Fulham, he got all 3 promoted in his first full season with all 3 clubs.
It's a good record.
And then at City, he just kind of meandered, but he got them up, right? And actually, the City team, we had this on the quiz the other week, didn't we? It scored like over 100 goals, that Man City team that got promoted. And that was the team under Keegan. But he just kind of meandered into nothingness once they were in the Premier League. And actually, City improved for a short period once Stuart Pearce took over from Keegan. And then that's definitely it. until Newcastle need me again in 2008. And I think Newcastle fans have kind of erased those 9 months from their memory that Keegan actually came back. I don't think that they want to remember it. A few Newcastle fans said to me, I can't wait till you talk about it. But yeah, don't even bother with the 9 months in 08. The problem was when he came back was, I think from the start it was an issue where they were in trouble. They'd just sacked Sam Allardyce, who'd only been there about 4 or 5 months. And the rumour is that Mike Ashley, perhaps unsurprisingly, offered Keegan terms that were basically 2/3 cheaper than what he was paying Sam Allardyce.
Yeah.
Keegan was like, all right, start again. Like, basically, I'm not a complete idiot.
Yeah.
But he knew he needed to go in and help them because they were in trouble. But at the same time, I think he even knew before he even took the job that it wasn't the same. It wasn't the same Newcastle. When Newcastle had changed from the Sir John Hall era to what obviously then going through Freddie Shepherd, who was more kind of Hall era, but it had not worked out so well for him. And then obviously gone completely downhill with Mike Ashley. He's now got a director of football, Dennis Wise, who they just did not get on. No. And then basically Keegan ended up, when he left Newcastle, he left because in the transfer window, basically didn't buy anyone in the, I think it was the January transfer window. They didn't, or they weren't going to buy anybody. And he was like, that this can't happen. He actually ended up suing Newcastle for £2 million, or Mike Ashley really. And he actually won that court case for unfair dismissal because when he was given the contract, he was given the contract of manager, and assumptions at that time was that manager buys players, etc. Yeah. And he was never told that somebody else would be taking charge of all that thing. Keegan wasn't a great coach, I don't believe. I think he was a great manager when things were on a positive direction. I don't think he was a great coach. I think his greatest achievement was what he did in the first place in '92. The fact that he stabilised that football club. It was a mess. The training ground was a mess. The stadium was a mess. And his impact on that football club left a legacy and memories that Newcastle fans obviously will never forget.
Nice. And now we move into another era, and we won't talk about it much, but ironically, probably about half an hour before we started recording this podcast, in one of the WhatsApp groups that I'm in, somebody put in a picture of Gareth Bale superimposed in a Newcastle United shirt. Here's what's about to come. No joke. I literally came up about 20 minutes ago. It's fantastic. And is that what we have to expect now?
No, because it's got to happen one step at a time. What you got to remember is, if you think about City in 08, when they got taken over, yes, they spent money, but they also bought some players who went on to do very well for them, who they identified as could be stars, who went on to be stars. Think of Vincent Kompany, who was bought as like a midfield player, basically went on to be one of the Premier League's best ever centre-halves. Pablo Zabaleta was not a heralded signing when he went to Manchester City. Newcastle will be able to buy top players and be able to waste money on the likes of your Roque Santa Cruzes and Wilfred Bonies and afford to be able to make those bad other Joe Linton decisions till they get the right one. But they are going to have to unearth and make their own stars. That's the only way they'll get there. They can't. Bale's on 600 grand a week, mate. He's donated £1 million today or yesterday, 500,000 to a hospital in Cardiff, and 500,000 to a hospital in Madrid, I believe, as well. So it wasn't Wales Golf Madrid. It was actually Wales Madrid Golf. But he's on 600 grand a week. What's £1 million to him? I know it's lovely, and he's still gone and done it, but it's 2 weeks' wages. Now, I can't particularly afford to go to the NHS. There's two weeks' wages of my salary. But if I could, I probably would, right? It's not a big deal.
It's ridiculous.
At best, it's month's money for him with tax, isn't it? At best.
Yep.
So it's still a brilliant, brilliant gesture. But yeah, so eye-watering numbers. You can't, when the top earners at Newcastle, and bearing in mind this is Newcastle now under Ashley, are probably on maybe 70, 80 grand a week. You can't like put Bale in at 600 grand, mate. They can't do it.
The numbers are astonishing, actually.
Do it.
Think about it, it's astonishing.
Why is he going to go there and take less? We know that Bell very, very nearly went to China. He was going to go, fuck it, here's my retirement money. Give me my 1.2 million a week or whatever he was going to run out there.
Yeah.
So, Manchester United still paying Alexis Sanchez $500,000 a week. Newcastle got to stagger it. If Newcastle go too hard too soon, they'll end up with issues. And I think the issues that City found originally, and then they levelled it out, actually, in fairness.
Yeah, there we go. Interesting look back at the Geordies, and I think we should pepper it with a little bit of caveats or an asterisk or whatever. They haven't been sold by Mike Ashley yet, and it's not. So it wouldn't surprise me if the deal did get scuppered. But it's more than likely not. But let's not get too excited about what's going to happen.
I'm 99% sure that deal is done. Whether rightly or wrongly, and I think the potential of the perhaps wrongly is something we'll obviously come back and revisit again in terms of stuff with Saudi Arabia and stuff. But I don't want to do that now. I wanted to remember what I think many people, particularly of our age and era, should remember this brilliant football team. I think many of us remember this Newcastle team better than the Manchester United team that won the double in the same season.
Definitely they were a lot more fun.
I'm not saying they were better than Manchester United. Listen, the right team won the league. United won the double. It was the second time they'd won the double in 3 years. I don't think Manchester United would have taken many players off Newcastle, but there was a great fondness in remembering that team and the way they played, and remembering characters like Asprilla and Ginola to go on top of Shearer, Ferdinand, Beardsley. I mean, trying to fit them all in a team together. You do it now, you go, can't play like that with attacking fullbacks and Philippe Albert doing whatever he wants at centre half. They brought David Batty in to try and be a holding midfield player. It made things worse. This doesn't suit us.
No, it's true. Definitely. There we go, James. Nice to chat about Newcastle. Tell me, what else have we got left this week? Ask James.
You can ask me anything about Newcastle, past, present, future, Champman, FPL, football restarting, anything you like. Tomorrow on YouTube, probably about 1-ish, give or take. And then I'll stream Champman Game Week 8, Saturday afternoon. And then we'll be back with a full schedule again from Monday through to Friday next week.
Indeed. And the way you can find out all about that is by following James on Twitter at Planet FPL Pod. Go to YouTube and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Planet FPL. Ring the bell, and every time we put something out, you will get notified. Enjoy the sunshine. Hopefully the weekend will stay a little bit sunny for a little while longer.
Nice day. Looks nice.
Yeah, it's glorious.
It looks nice.
So yeah, do enjoy it. Stay safe, and ciao for now.
Be nice to each other. Cue music, man, child. Why?